let me set the stage for you. In John 13, truly one of the most, I want to say, magical moments of Christ's ministry happens. John 13 through 17 is John's writing, his telling of the gospel story. What's unique about John and really, really cool is he takes us almost minute by minute through the evening before Jesus passes, before Calvary, before his death on the cross. And so there's 5 chapters that kind of cover 5 to 7 hours of Jesus' life. And so it's a really intense zoom into that moment. We're going to look at the first chapter, and we're going to look at Jesus at the table with his disciples. We're actually going to be in this space for the next 2 weeks as we begin to put a button and close down this series of Welcome to the Table. I want us to spend some time at the table with Jesus and his disciples so that we can have a moment to truly learn what he wanted to deposit to his disciples and therefore also to us. And so, everything is, hindsight's always 20/20, right? We can always see better going back. And every story that we hear about Jesus, about his life, about his ministry, about all that he did for us while he was on earth, we all see it in hindsight. We don't see any of it as it happens. And so I would really want to encourage you, as we spend some time here in this moment today, as much as you possibly can, consider for a moment that these guys, his disciples, truly had no idea what all was about to take place. They could sense, I'm sure, some kind of storm brewing. Jesus did everything he could to even warn them, if not blatantly tell them this is going to happen. He did that. But even still, there was this confusion and uncertainty because they could not see it with as much clarity as Jesus could. A perfect example of this, and the first thing that I want us to kind of look at, when I was reading over John 13, which is a very familiar passage. For those of you who don't know John 13, by the simple words John 13, this is where Jesus goes to have his Last Supper with his disciples. He washes their feet. He tells Judas, gives him the green light, if you will, to betray him. In John, where we're going to read, this also is the moment where he makes the announcement, one of you will betray me. And John gives us the detail that the guys asked, hey, Jesus, which one is it? And Peter, John, kind of under their breath and right next to Jesus, found out that it was Judas. Judas gave them a code. Jesus was like, the one that I dip the bread into the cup and then hand it to, he's the one. And then Judas goes on to do that. And then he has this interesting conversation with Simon Peter. We're going to look at that conversation with Simon Peter in detail in just a moment, so I won't recap it right now. But again, we see it after the fact. They were sitting there at this table, maybe sensing the storm brewing, but more than likely had no idea that the next 3 days had in store for them what they had in store for them. And so the first thing I'd like to point to you is this detail that I noticed upon my reading again this week, and that is how much Jesus knew and how little the disciples knew. Check this out in verses 1, 3, and 11 from John. It says, Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. Jesus knew he was going to betray him. And that was why he said, not everyone was clean. Now, in the New Living Translation, so I'm reading right now from the NIV. It was interesting. You go to verse 28. In the NIV, it says they did not understand. In the NLT, it says none of the others at the table knew what Jesus meant. They didn't understand what he was saying. And so I love how as we read this rich story of Jesus' moment at the table with his disciples, there's this clear difference of Jesus knowing and their not knowing. His clarity and their like murkiness. And so the first thing I really want to zoom in on for us is this, that when we take a seat at the table of God, we are engaging someone who knows more than we do. God knows more than we know. In fact, you might even call God like a know-it-all. What's really beautiful about God, though, is the critical difference is he doesn't expect you to be anything beyond who you are. I don't know, like a great example of this in particular, but surely you've been in a circumstance where you might be frustrated because you want something out of somebody that they can't give you at the moment, right? That happens, I'm sure, like whether it's a kid or a friend or a spouse or an Uber driver or somebody who's in front of you in line or whatever. There's always something that you might want in the situation. There's an expectation or a desire that you have that cannot be fulfilled in that moment for a number of reasons. What I would say to you is that God appropriately is patient with your progress or lack thereof. And I want us to go to the story, the detail of Simon Peter at the end of this chapter. This is Jesus' words. He's talking to his disciples. He says, "Dear children," he said, "look, I'm only going to be with you a little while longer. And as I told the Jewish leaders, you're going to search for me, but you can't go where I'm going. So now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples." And Simon Peter asked, "Lord, where are you going?" And Jesus replied, "You can't go with me now, but you will follow me later." "Why can't I come with you now, Lord?" He asked. I'm ready to die for you." And Jesus answered, "Die for me? I tell you the truth, Peter. Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." Again, very familiar passage, right? For many of us, it might be the 500th time we read this, but if you look at it for a moment, look at Peter from the lens of this is just another Thursday night. And he's seemingly clear in his zeal for the Lord. Like, "God, I want to go with you. Why can't I go with you? Like, I'm ready to die for you." And yet the Lord can look at Peter with clarity, receive his zeal, his limited understanding, and yet still speak to him in a way that says, "Look, I understand what you think you know about the situation, but I also know all of the realities of this situation. And man, like before the night's over, you're going to deny 3 times that you even know me." Do you see the stark difference in what Peter thinks, what Jesus knows, and yet how well he handles the situation and lets him know the truth? I had a counselor that once told me, "You don't know that you don't know all the things that you don't know until you know." So our action step for this week, and I would encourage you, if you have a journal, if you take notes in your phone, wherever you do, spend some time jotting things down to capture them spiritually. I would encourage you to jot this down. Our action step this week, man, is God, what do I need to know? Like, Lord, what is it that I'm not seeing? Where could I benefit from your perspective? And I would encourage you to take some time and listen to the Lord and how he might answer that question in moments of prayer, reflection, and meditation. God, what is it that I need to know? Because again, when we take a seat at the table of God, we engage someone who knows more than we do. Second, when we take a seat at the table of God, whatever message you've had in your life, God can handle it and he wants to. God can handle it and he wants to. Again, a very familiar story, but I would invite you to slow down and really let what's actually happening come to your brain, to your imagination, and to your heart with fresh eyes. Let's take a fresh glimpse at this story. From verse 3. It says, Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything and that he had come from God and would return to God. And so he got up from the table and he took off his robe and he wrapped a towel around his waist and he poured water into a basin. He got up from the table. He took off his robe. He wrapped a towel around his waist and poured water into a basin. And then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that he had around him. And here's Peter again. And when Jesus came to Peter, Peter said to him, Lord, God, are you going to wash my feet? And Jesus replied, you don't understand now what I am doing, but someday you will. No, Peter protested. You will never, ever wash my feet. And Jesus replied, unless I wash you, you won't belong to me. And Simon Peter exclaimed, well, please, then wash my hands, wash my head, not just my feet. Jesus goes on to say, this is where he begins to foreshadow his understanding of Judas and the betrayal, that if you've been washed head to toe, if you've been bathed head to toe, you don't need to have everything washed all over again, just the feet. He said, but not all of you are clean. And so again, he used that as almost like a segue of foreshadowing about what he was about to reveal about Judas. But I think it is so refreshing for us, again, just to take a moment to look at like Jesus, master, rabbi, teacher, miracle worker, all the things that he is, having this moment where he gets up, when all authority and all power has been given to him, takes the position of a servant and begins to wash the disciples' feet. I would submit to you, one of the reasons why he did this was so that he could, again, with great clarity, give them something unforgettable in a very chaotic weekend. Like, whatever expectations they had as far as like Jesus' rule and reign and like his overthrowing of the empire and like all those things, like it was not going to come anywhere near like what they might be expecting. And so in the aftermath of it all, they could look back on this moment and go, oh my goodness, I get it. Because each and every one of them can remember the moment where they had their bare feet extended to the one who died on the cross and rose from the grave, and he was there washing them. And so I don't know how you approach the Lord. I don't know what messes you find difficult to hold yourself or put in his hands, but I would want to say with a little bit of humor, it's kind of silly to get shy with someone who literally has seen everything. And then I would also want to say, like, the best place for your hurts to be held and healed are in the hands of Jesus. I like to think about that night and how I would love to see a snapshot of each of the disciples' feet, because each of them would have been dirty differently. Just think of the detail of each. I mean, I did not mean for this. It's funny. Sometimes I don't have a connection to the one question 180 to moments in the sermon, and sometimes they just happen. Like, I have 11 toenails on my feet. Like, I did not ask that question, but man, like that would be a detail. In that moment, the Lord would get intimately close with the realities of my feet and the realities of how I got them dirty, and his heart would be to get them clean. And he did it for each one of them, even Judas. And so our action step for this week, I would invite you, man, to pinpoint a hurt or a frustration and give it to the Lord. When I say that, I don't know how that might sit with you, but if it's an area of unforgiveness, if it's an area of frustration where you sense yourself in a habitual cycle, where you continue to do something that you do not want to do and it hurts, you're tired of it, if you could put it, again, in the hands of the Lord and not just let go of it and go, well, God will figure it out and walk away. But, sit next to him, again, in a time of prayer and meditation and say, God, what do I do with this? How do I hold this differently in a way to where when your hands come upon it, the change that I long for and sense that is needed begins? Pinpoint a hurt or a frustration and spend time holding that with the Lord. Third and finally, his longing is that we share his love. It says, after washing their feet, he put on his robe again. And he sat down and he asked them, do you understand what I was doing? I would encourage you that as we continue to read these following words, instead of reading Jesus speaking to the disciples, I would encourage you to read them as Jesus speaking to you. Do you understand what I was doing? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, because that is what I am. And since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. We're not going to do that today. Don't worry. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you. He goes on to say, I tell you the truth, slaves are not greater than their master, nor is the messenger more important than the one who sends the message. Now that you know these things, God will bless you for doing them. He's articulating with great clarity that the example that he has set is not only a good example, it is what he wants for us, for our interactions with each other. And he closes this thought a little bit later in the chapter. He says, now I'm giving you a new commandment, love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. Action step for that one is position yourself to love like Jesus. What does it look like for us? Jesus, again, put himself in the position of a servant, a foot washer, and served his disciples, lovingly put himself in a position where even though he had all power, all authority, even though he was, quote unquote, the most important, the sovereign figure in the room, the way that he led was to serve. So how can I position myself this week to serve someone else? When I read this, I think to myself, man, where do I not want to serve? Like, where is it that I'm like, man, that situation's good, that person's good, I don't want to mess with that. Where do I have room to grow in serving someone else and loving someone else? I also want to invite you as a church family for us to, like, on a holy endeavor. We're going to do this holy endeavor business, and we'll have a moment with the Lord, and we'll close for today. But we're coming into the Christmas season, the holiday season. And I know we're not quite there yet, but like from a planning perspective, we still have Halloween and we still have Thanksgiving. But from a planning perspective, I have an endeavor of generosity for our church. There's an organization called Prison Fellowship that is a nationwide organization, and they have with them in that organization an arm of generosity called Angel Tree. Perhaps you've heard of it before. But there's more than one entity that uses the term Angel Tree for Christmas stuff. And this one in particular, it is a ministry to incarcerated parents to give their children a gift on their behalf for Christmas. And so what's really beautiful is when you think about Angel Tree, it's like, oh, you're giving gifts to kids for whose parents are in prison. And it sounds like it is a ministry to the kids. And there's part of that that's true. But the reality of it is actually primarily a ministry to the incarcerated parent, because where it begins is Prison Fellowship going into prisons and saying, hey, who wants to give a gift to their kid? And all the parents that want to do that say, me please, and they fill out the forms and they begin the paperwork and they begin the process of blessing a child. And this is something that I was a part of with my church in Lubbock for over a decade. And so I was really cautious at first about coming here and being like, we're going to do Angel Tree, because I always want to be somebody, I don't want to just repeat things that I've done for the sake of repeating things I've done. So I waited like 2 years to see if there were any other like holiday rhythms that we have as a church and listening. And there wasn't really anything like, that had a lot of momentum. We've always been intentional in the Christmas season. But there isn't something quite like this that we've owned and put our hands to. And so here's the crazy endeavor. I want us to sponsor 100 kids, which is insane, right? I don't want us to buy gifts for 100 kids, okay? So that's not what I'm saying. But I do want us to sponsor 100 children. So it means like we will take on the administrative organization. And what that means is we call the guardians, and basically you check in with the guardians to make sure all the information that Prison Fellowship has collected is correct. You get folks to sponsor gifts and return them wrapped, and then you throw a huge party for the families and the kids come and pick it up. And so what we're going to do is just the logistical detail of figuring out all the needs, getting all of our friends to help us, right? Go out and buy the gifts. We have a great handprint. So for example, I have like 5 or 6 guys that I smoke cigars with. All 5 or 6 of those guys don't go to church here. But I can say, hey guys, we're doing this thing where we're looking to, we can just tap our community connections and invite them to help us bless 100 children this Christmas season. It's just one way that I think that we can position ourselves to love like Jesus. So I wanted to get that in your heart and in your brain and in your imagination as we begin to tip toward the holiday season, because I believe I've seen it in previous adventures. This touches lives in a powerful way. One angel story, and then we'll stand up and we'll have our time with the Lord. So the first thing you do is you call the guardians just to make sure that the information that you have is correct, right? Because they handle a ridiculous volume of information. So is the age correct? Are these the things that they are looking for Christmas? Those kinds of things, right? We called a grandmother who was the caregiver of this little girl. And the grandmother said, man, I don't care what you write down on the list of gift ideas, but please, will you please simply get her pajamas? And our volunteer that was calling said, okay, yeah, sure, what size? And she gave her the size. She said, can I ask, why pajamas? Why specifically pajamas? And she said, because she got pajamas last year from her mom through Angel Tree, and she's worn them literally every night since. It was just amazing. It speaks to what this ministry does for the family, for the child, for all of it. Anyway, and so I can't wait. I can't wait for us. And what's even more fun is that we're going to have our Angel Tree party on a Sunday morning, right? So we won't have it on an off. We're going to have it right here, in our church, in our sanctuary on Sunday morning. Have the families here on Sunday. They're going to come, pick up gifts, take pictures with the gifts, have Christmas cookies with us. It'll be a whole thing. It'll be we won't do this on a Tuesday night, right? We get to do this on Sunday morning. We get to pick. We get to open up our doors and our home and our hearts on Sunday morning and bless 100 children.